Ministers McKenna and Carr, thank you for coming to our Environment and Sustainable Development Committee to speak to Bill C-69. I, like many of my colleagues, believe that this may be the most important piece of legislation that our government passes, and we have passed some very important legislation since forming office. As a British Columbian with strong roots in the prairies, I feel strongly that the current legislative and regulatory framework for projects have, in the past decade, failed our country, including our economy, our environment, and, as importantly, our Indigenous peoples. We're seeing this through the conflict that's arisen, as an example, under the Kinder Morgan pipeline project that affects British Columbians, Albertans, and Canadians. As a government, we added interim principles to address the shortcomings of the legislative and regulatory process left by the previous government for the Kinder Morgan pipeline project, and yet conflict remains. Can each of you summarize for our committee and Canadians who are following these hearings how Bill C-69 will provide clarity and certainty in the process for assuring future projects under federal jurisdiction, how this legislation will provide better protection for our environment, and how future assessments will include the input of Canadians, including Indigenous Canadians, with whom we as a country have a special relationship that requires special consideration. And if you could each take about 2 minutes to provide your summary, that would be really appreciated. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you very much. And I do want to thank my deputy, Stephen Lucas, as if I don't know your name, but and also Ron Hallman, the president of SIA. They've done an amazing job. Look, we knew when we came in as a government that we needed to rebuild trust in our environmental assessment system. We heard that from environmentalists, we heard that from Indigenous peoples, we heard that from Canadians, we also heard that from industry, because it was impeding on, as you say, lack of trust meant that it was much more challenging for good projects to go ahead. And that's exactly what we've done in the proposed legislation, is rebuilding trust. And rebuilding trust means that we have made clear that the views of Canadians will be heard. The views of communities will be heard. There will be no standing test, that if you have concerns, you have your opportunity to make them clear. That we need to be, reconciliation is a top priority for our government, that we need to be working in partnership with Indigenous peoples, and that starts at the very beginning. So that starts in a new early engagement phase, and it goes all the way through monitoring of projects, and that Indigenous traditional knowledge is a must-have, not nice to have. We also, are looking. We've moved from just looking at the environmental factors to a broader impact assessment test, which will look at factors like what the impacts on social impacts, the health impacts, the economic impacts of a project, as well as, of course, the environmental impacts. And we realize that this is actually going to be better. Because when you do this, you will be able to build trust in Canadians that we are making decisions on robust science, that we are listening to communities, that we are working in partnership with Indigenous peoples, but also at the same time making sure that good projects go ahead in a timely way. So we've also, as part of that, looked at how do we ensure that we do more work in the front end, where we will give more certainty to business by looking at how do we work with provinces so that we aren't duplicating efforts and making it more difficult for proponents, but also that they are giving guidance about how to consult with Indigenous peoples and the permitting process.
I would just add that this is a different world than it was in 1959 when the National Energy Board was first established. This is a different world even when the first idea of building pipelines were developed by proponents and the process of regulatory review was established a number of years ago. And this bill reflects that changing world. And we believe it reflects it in a way that recognizes and honors the three pillars of responsible economic development in the energy sector. And that is that we want good projects to go through. We understand that the expansion of export markets is a vital Canadian interest. 99% of Canada's exports of oil and gas go to one country, to the United States. We don't think that's healthy in the short term or the long term. So we start looking at what result we want, and we conclude that we want responsible good projects to go through in a timely way while respecting the environmental realities and our international and domestic obligations and our constitutional and moral obligations to Indigenous peoples. And we think that all three of those pillars